Good morning. Welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. It's the last edition of the show before Christmas, and Santa Claus has come early for us in the form of the English Devolution white paper, which is more than we could possibly have hoped for. Anyway, I'm David. I'm joined as ever by Alex, by Martin, by Stephen. What we're going to do, I've just got a quick summary of the basics of the white paper, and then I think we're going to get into discussing that. So it's bringing in strategic authorities, quote unquote, to remove to replace the basically patchwork of local councils we've got at the moment. The strong preference in there is for directly elected mayors, and everyone is basically going to be on that track to having directly elected mayors with broad powers over housing, transport, economic development, and potentially other things as well. Included, and there's also going to be talk about lining up different administrative boundaries, mayors being on the boards or being chairing integrated care systems and so on. So the idea is that this is going to be universal coverage of devolution across England, and that it's going to be simplifying the structures we've got, and the ad hoc agreements, the deals, will basically replace everyone eventually having the same powers. There's going to be more powers. So one of the big ones is there's going to be an integrated funding settlement. So there will be one pot of money rather than bits of money being assigned for different areas, so that mayors will be able to work on their priorities for the area, and they'll have authority over transport systems, potentially including trains, spatial planning, regional energy strategies, which is really interesting. There's support for local economic clusters. I mean, for Cambridgeshire, a lot of that is life sciences, high-tech stuff coming off the university. And as I mentioned, alignment of public service boundaries with regional governments to enhance efficiency and integration. The creation of councils like the mayoral council and the council of regions and nations and regions, so there's better coordination between central government and the rest of government, basically, and hopefully sort of improving that part of decision making. So where devolution is, mayors are there already, or there's areas already, that will go through very quickly, and basically everybody is on a pathway to established mayor status, which gets them more powers, integrated settlements, and so on. So that's the sort of pen portrait summary of it. I've probably missed things. Well, actually, let's stop there. What have I missed?
Have you read the whole thing?
No.
Good. So probably lots then. Probably lots of fine details, which are going to affect us all. But it's a good summary, I think.
Christmas reading list.
Yeah, I've been through. I mean, there's lots of other things. I mean, there's stuff about standards and audit, and I mean, there's all sorts in there. There's lots of stuff about stuff about the process and so on.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is the one thing, and it's important for Cambridgeshire, is they've said that I think these strategic authorities have got to be a minimum of 500,000 population. And that's what's really important for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, because we're at about 900,000. So if you base the final outcome on that, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have got to have a single unitary. And that, to me, is the critical point, is how flexible are the government going to be about that 500,000? Yeah. Because that and then you get into how does Cambridgeshire split, but that's another matter.
I mean, I think there's also a thing about is it how rigidly are we going to be sticking to existing boundaries? Because if you is there the potential to go beyond the existing boundaries? So, for instance, Peterborough, like it might. I'm not saying this is never the case, but it might make sense for Peterborough to include bits of what's currently Lincolnshire, Rutland, Northants, and so on. And equally, I'm thinking particularly of St Neots, where you're right against the border. It might actually make sense for parts of Bedfordshire to sort of be clearly within the ambit of St Neots.
Yeah, no, I agree. All of that is really difficult. Northamptonshire is an interesting one. Remember when we had a LEP, Rutland were part of the local enterprise partnership. So, and that obviously suggests there's economic links between Rutland and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So that's a possibility. Northamptonshire is interested because West Northants, before the Devo white paper was published, have put out a statement of intent about working with Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes to create a combined authority. Now, that was a combined authority under the old model where they wouldn't have had to integrate councils. But what was interesting was a couple of days after the Devo white paper was published, West Northants Council put out a tweet which basically explained that they'd already committed to that or already submitted something for that. And if West Northants do that, it really leaves North Northants really isolated. So there is a sense that bringing them into Cambridgeshire and Peterborough might make sense as well. Because I can also see the idea of combining Northamptonshire together again going down like an absolute lead balloon.
And one of the things that's specifically in the white paper is they don't want to leave any islands that aren't covered. So,
yeah.
Actually, I suppose one of the we should probably start by saying is why is the government doing this?
Because it's a mess. Everybody agrees it's a mess. But it might not be a mess everywhere, but in Cambridgeshire, it's utterly a mess, especially for those who are of us who are elected at multiple levels, which is actually me at the moment, isn't it? It's absolutely, I've been doing this for 8 years, and there's still things that sometimes stump me. So the fact that any member of the public who's not engaged with politics every day is supposed to understand who everybody thinks they've got the councillor and the council, whereas in fact they've got, I think there's 35 elected representatives in St Neots, across 3 or 4 different councils plus Parliament, and it's just so confusing for everyone, and so it needs sorting out. And the whole thing is in financial crisis anyway. We can talk about the settlements if you like in a bit.
Yeah, I was going to mention as well, like one of the government plans is to look at like multi-year settlements or different ways of funding the local level. And I think one of the big arguments is that if you had the mayoral authorities and unitaries, it is just easier and more efficient to have those longer term funding deals. Whether it will happen or not is yet to be seen. But the more layers you have, the more the government allocation of funding, the more complicated it becomes. But I agree with Stephen. I think the main reason is the fact that across all the county councils, not only in Cambridgeshire, although we have particular challenges with even more layers of local authorities, especially with the GCP area and some of parts of the county council, it is just how complicated it is, and how, especially on very strategic decisions, such as if you look at transport, you have so many layers involved, and it's very difficult to progress things like public transport or major infrastructure projects when you have, five or 6 layers of local authority.
And in fact, it's quite important. That bit about transport is really important because the government have also said that they're going to get rid of the veto as well. Which for Cambridgeshire, again, is really important because actually, one of the things that really, really upset people in the combined authority was Peterborough using the transport veto on what was basically a Cambridgeshire issue, and it really did go down badly and cause a lot of animosity in the combined authority. And that, I think, getting rid of that would be a good thing. I personally think. you know, even if you start, you know, if you go back to basics, we haven't had a local government reorganisation, a proper one. We've had little bits of layers added on that's made it more complicated, which is what Stephen was saying. But it's 50 years since the last one. And so it is about time. And then you sit and look at it and say, you know, if we were to start and rebuild local government from scratch, would we use the model we've got? Absolutely not. And so the reasons why I think are pretty clear. And that's not just Cambridgeshire. There's all sorts of other issues for me. I'm just about to post something on LinkedIn this morning about the fact that I'm really pleased the government are biting the bullet and doing things. I don't agree with all of it, but they're actually doing things and tackling issues which have been ducked for a long time. And you know, this is one of them. You know, and there's a reality which their changes to planning and especially the way decisions are made in planning reflect as well, which is a lot of district councils are really not good enough. You know, and that's a reality. There are some great district councils out there, you know, and some good ones. There are some really awful ones as well. And there's a reality to that is people deserve better than that. And more strategic councils is one way of dealing with that issue.
Yeah, and it's about the strategy as well, because I mean, one of the arguments against, I guess, reorganization in the short term is, well, don't we have a lot of other issues to focus on? Why should we spend money on doing this now? You know, there's so many potholes to be filled in, you know, like so many issues in children's, adult social care. Surely we should spend the additional funding from government on those immediate priority areas and not on reorganizing our county council area. However, I think the more you actually delay this decision, the fewer savings you can do in the long term, because actually if you have a more efficient form of local government in 10 years time, it will be probably better financially, but it is it's very difficult to think not to delay it because it is unpopular. Because I can see how residents will say, why are you spending your time and energy and money on this? Surely we have immediate priorities to be sorted and not discussing this.
But there's also a reality. There's a couple of things for me on that, and I agree. But there's a reality around the reorganisation, which is it will save money, and the sooner we crack on and get it done, the sooner we can start saving that money. And every year we don't do it is a year where we're not saving that money as well. So from my perspective, you know, I don't buy that argument. I really don't buy it. And you know, it's difficult. And I can see a lot of district councillors looking at it and seeing the writing on the wall, which has happened everywhere where they've unitarised, by the way. Unitarised? Moved to unitaries. Everywhere they've done that, you know, they've been through these arguments. And actually, when you get out the other end very quickly, you get masses of councillors saying we should have done this years ago. You know, that's what I've seen in certainly I did a peer review of Shropshire not long after they moved to a unitary, and that's the message I got there from the friends I have over in Buckinghamshire. You know, they've said the same thing, although they've got a really big council in Buckinghamshire which they're going to have to deal with. But you know, they all say the same thing. Why didn't we do this years ago? So let's get on and do it. And from my perspective, you know, I would say this to leaders in Cambridgeshire: recognise it's coming, deal with it, work with it, find a solution quickly, and let's get on with it. I'd much rather we found a solution and somebody said no elections in May because we're going to move to this unitary, than we sit and dither about, have one election that we don't need to have.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns is because, you know, if let's go into whether there's agreement or not on how it should be done, because it's an interesting question. But I think it's one of those cases where I'm really concerned. It would be very tempting for people to say, oh, we actually don't really agree on the boundaries and whether you should have one or two or how this should work, or there are different views. Let's postpone it a bit longer. So I think that's like a real concern, that people, when they get around the table saying like, we actually don't agree, let's move it until next year. It's always easier to postpone than, as you say, Martin, to just say, okay, we have to take this decision now. It will make savings in the long term. It might be unpopular, but it has to be done, you know.
Go on. One of the criticisms of the 1974 reorganisation was it was done too quickly, and they made loads of mistakes. And you still see. I mean, have a look at the map of the areas of land that are responsible for St Neots Town Council and HDC in St Neots, and it's like a quilt of like, you know, nobody ever thought it through because it was rushed through last time, and that's the problem, isn't it? I understand the imperative to doing it, but doing it properly because it's going to last for 50 years probably at least is really important.
That's actually really interesting.
Yes and no. My concern about the boundaries, I go back to it, is Huntingdonshire, because if you look at if Cambridgeshire is split into two, common sense says that you split Huntingdonshire into two as well, and half of it goes into a Cambridge unitary, and the other half goes into a Peterborough one, and I feel for that, because actually I think Huntingdonshire is a good council. I mean, it's been a good council for a while. Its planning committee pretty much works. It's well led. It's got a good chief executive, and somewhere in the middle of that, you could argue that Huntingdonshire as an entity loses out, and that's the bit for me. But I just think if the decision is two unitaries, because I can't see Peterborough agreeing to go back into Cambridgeshire, if the solution is two unitaries, I have to say, much as I've said all that, Huntingdonshire has to bite the bullet a little bit.
So there's a couple of things. Well, there's quite a lot of things there. I mean, on the speed, I think there's a difficult balance here, because this is also, this is early in the term, this is big stuff, and the government's getting on with it. Mm-hmm. And so, this is something's going on. I think if they're reducing the number of councils, that potentially makes things easier. We have the same patchwork quilt problem in Huntingdon. I mean, somewhere I've got the map of land ownership for the Oxmoor, and it looks like a Jackson Pollock painting. It really does. It's surreal. So and there are some things, like there'll be like what happens to particular pieces of there will be negatives that come out of this. There will be a particular community facility that there'll be question that, and of course there'll be one of the things is there'll be a lot of concerns about the staff. Understandably, staff will be worried about what this means for them.
No, I understand that, and that is difficult. And I say that's where places like Huntingdonshire, it becomes difficult, because it is a good authority, and I feel for it. And naturally, if there's two unitaries and Fenland moves into Peterborough, which I can't see any other solution if it's a two council solution than Fenland going into Peterborough. Effectively, you see the planning department all moving over to Peterborough, because you can't, for all sorts of reasons. It makes absolute sense. But I and there's some really good staff in Fenland. And my view about how Fenland is led, and the fact that the council isn't good enough. And part of me says, and this is the point about bad councils and councils that aren't good enough, is this consolidation and the move of staff away into another centre. There may be some down points to that in terms of moving people away from places like March and whatever. But there's an upside, which is moving good people into a good authority and into another place will be good for them. So for some staff, this will be the best thing that's ever happened to them. But inevitably, if this is about saving money, there's going to be jobs lost as well, and that of course that's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to so on the actually there's an interesting one with Rutland. Is Rutland going to stay as its own thing? Because that would seem, I'll go back to the thing. It's like you can. It would seem to make sense that places I don't know. There are places. So the Peterborough boundary is quite strange, and there's places just north of the boundary. I think Market Deeping isn't in Peterborough, so place like that might make sense. I mean, there's I don't know. We'll have to look at it. I mean, there's I suppose the other thing is East Cambs. does it, where does Ely go? Does Ely go into North Cambridgeshire?
I would put Ely personally. I think in terms of travel to work and stuff like that, I think Ely is better placed, aligned with Cambridge. The other one, and the other issue that you throw in there, which would be really, really controversial, is Newmarket. There is a really, really strong argument when you look at the boundary, you look at where the connections are and everything else, that Newmarket actually belongs in Cambridgeshire, and it has been in the past.
There's a weird cutout, isn't there? There's a weird cutout, isn't there?
Yeah.
Parts of it are still.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you take the travel to work argument as well, like Newmarket is one of those examples of like, a 20-minute drive can be a very fast bus to Cambridge, especially the east side of Cambridge as well. So, if you take that argument of like having this half an hour travel to work area, you should probably think about Newmarket as well.
But also with Newmarket, and this is something that makes sense as well. If you think about what Newmarket is, what's Newmarket for, and it basically is a headquarters for British racing.
Yeah.
But a lot of the racing facilities, like the Jockeys Training School and the National Stud, I believe, are both in Cambridgeshire actually, and not in Newmarket, and not in West Suffolk. So there's a thing about bringing that whole economy under one entity.
That's really true.
And putting all that into Cambridgeshire would make sense. And if I was the mayor and whoever was influencing government, that's one of the things I would push out for.
I remember being at, I think 2 years ago, before it was at Abbots Ripton, the Cambridgeshire County Show with the young farmers, and it was on one of the areas like just outside Newmarket, and it is in Cambridgeshire actually, and people are really confused, thinking like, well, I'm going to Newmarket, it's not in our county, and it's the Cambridgeshire County Show, but actually it is part of Cambridgeshire, so many people don't know that.
It's like there's that pub in London, which until surprisingly late on was part of Cambridgeshire, because it had ended up owned by, it was like something like where the Bishop of Ely had stayed when they were in London, and so ended up randomly being part of Cambridgeshire until like the 1930s.
I think a Cambridgeshire takeover of London would be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this before, I think, but David I, King of Scots, was actually from Huntingdon. He was Earl of Huntingdon. So I think there's an argument we should be making that Huntingdon should annex Scotland, and we should get we should move Holyrood to Stow Longer.
I've got lots of Scottish friends, and I just want to disassociate myself with that, because a number of them are Scots as well. So
similar is not my personal view, but I want to bring like a more realistic scenario, because it's very interesting, because broadly we actually agree in here, like the four of us, about, I mean, of course there are complications, but we think roughly in similar terms in terms of like how those two authorities should split or shouldn't split. Some of the views in Cambridge City are really, really different. I want to put like a different proposition to you and see what you think. Like one of the very quite popular views is we should have a Cambridge City area, maybe with just the surrounding small villages, for it to grow enough to be its own unitary. I haven't heard this at all, like, obviously in Huntingdon or like, other colleagues around here, but it is something that is thought about in Cambridge City, and it's quite a common view, like in the last week speaking about this. So I want to bring it up here to see what you think about it. Personally, I don't think it's possible. Like I don't think you should triple the size of Cambridge anyway, in terms of like building, but that's something that people realistically consider. Can Cambridge City and very close by villages grow fast enough and big enough to be its own unitary?
You can't keep as we are now with Cambridge as a donut. With South Cambridgeshire as a donut around Cambridge, with Cambridge as a unitary, it just does not make sense at all. Is my view, and it's also true that the leader of South Cambs has come out basically against the government proposals, and I suspect a lot of this is about politics, and it's about what would the political, what would a Cambridge unitary look like politically? And for me, I don't care. All that settles down eventually, and it does settle down, and you get into business as usual. The issue for me is, what works for the people of Cambridgeshire, and an isolated Cambridge city just doesn't work. It just doesn't. At the very least, and I'm sorry, I just want to say, this is something I've said before, that if you want Cambridge to reach its potential as a city and as an economic powerhouse through what it does, it can't do it within the geography that is currently just Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. It just cannot. The only way you could do it is by really compressing everything, and then you lose the sense of beauty that you need from a really, really good science-based place.
So there's a few things there. One is, I do like a lot of what's in this. This isn't if I was drawing up the system, this isn't the system. In my fantasy world, I think the more I think about it, I'd be going back to something much more like Redcliffe Maud, and we would have provincial government, regional governments, and small unitaries. I think one of the questions I have is, if you don't have Cambridge City Council, what is the voice for the Martin, I take your point about the economic area that is Cambridge, but do you end up with like Cambridge Parish Council effectively as something representing Cambridge? I mean, some of it is just the practical things like, do you still have a mayor of Cambridge, or does that just go?
It is, but it's one of the councillors. So one of the city councillors gets chosen like every year to be mayor. So it's not a direct elected.
No, I know. But if we're getting rid of, I appreciate that. But if you get rid of the Cambridge City Council, does it matter? But I'm just saying, the point about the position of mayor is it can be a voice for the town, the city, the settlement.
I think civic mayors have an important role to play, and I think you would need to do something like that for Cambridge City, but I don't think that is incompatible. I think you could have a Cambridge City Council that is basically a civic council in the way that parish and town councils are, and that makes sure that Cambridge City has got its own voice of some sort. I think that's doable and achievable, and I think a civic mayor, sat in the middle of that is great. I do think the idea of having civic mayors and combined authority mayors, or strategic authority mayors, or whatever you want to call them, is confusing for the population, but that's another matter.
Yeah, I agree on. I mean, I wish we could come up with different nomenclature. If I can pick up on one of the things, though, is I hope that we can avoid, and there'll be some of this from my party as well, that we avoid too much of the positioning for partisan advantage. Particularly, a lot of that is short term, and things change depending on how you want to look at it. Events, dear boy, events, or shit happens, yo. I mean, I would love them to bring in PR for local elections at the same time as part of this. There's one concern I have, and is the stuff that's coming out of Reform.
Yeah,
saying that this is that they might not have some elections in authorities that are going to be abolished. Now, you can make an argument that actually it's a bad idea. You shouldn't be suspending elections, and if you're having big changes, you should get a fresh mandate. I don't buy that, but there's an argument there. I think there's another argument that says if you're getting rid of the council, it's not worth having elections, both because of the cost and the disruption, and also you've only got a year. Things like planning functions. You've only have new people coming in. You've only got a year to train them. Now, the concern I have is that Reform are coming out immediately and saying this is a plot by Labour, or as it usually comes out, LIBOR to stop reform getting elected. And I just don't think that's true. You can say it's a good or bad idea, but that's not what's going on here.
Well, it's not true at all. Like, first of all, just and I will bring in the argument about like the political argument in Cambridge City as well. So first of all, most county councils are conservative run. Like, it's not actually advantageous to Labour. Actually, putting together Cambridge City with like parts of Huntington and East Cambs is probably not advantageous to the Labour government locally. So I think like people who are saying like, oh, this is like a plot by Keir Starmer to take power at the local level, I think it actually makes it more difficult for the Labour Party to have control of those authorities, to be honest, as things stand currently with the polling.
I mean, I disagree with that. I do think it benefits Labour to a certain extent, because I think if you look at what's likely to happen next year, it doesn't benefit Labour. What I think is the county elections next year are likely, as it is at the moment, to go in Labour's favour, and the reason for that is basically that if you look at where Reform take their votes, they take the votes basically from Conservative voters, not entirely, but a large portion of the Reform votes are Conservative voters. And if you look at the general election and what happened in the general election, Labour won seats because Reform took votes away from the Conservatives. And I don't see why that would be any different for the county council elections next year. And certainly councils like Lancashire, as an example, you can see where Lancashire is likely to move back to being Labour controlled, as a result of it. I think that under the current system, Labour are likely to gain rather than lose next year. But that doesn't change the fact that in the long term, this is the right thing to do. And that means doing some difficult things like delaying elections by a year, so that we can have one election and not have election overload in the world.
How is that going to work out at a local level in Cambridgeshire, though? Because like Cambridgeshire is like, well, across Huntingdonshire and Cambridgeshire, there's lots of coalitions, isn't there? And getting that single view and like moving it away from the partisanship, which David mentioned as well, I think it's going to be quite difficult. I think.
Yeah, I think it links back to the Cambridge argument as well, which I have like a different view perhaps to some colleagues in this. But there is some of the arguments by some colleagues saying, well, it should follow the boundary of the development corporation, right? So it's like partly mostly Cambridge City should have unitary as development corporation area is covered. And one of the arguments is the political argument. And I'm one of the people who I actually don't think Cambridge City will be long-term a Labour stronghold. That's just my personal view. I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong as a Labour person, but I don't think that's an argument at all to say, well, we should make it this way, because firstly, you should just do what makes sense and what's best for residents. And secondly, I don't think that is, one of the areas where you can say, yes, it's always been this political party, because Cambridge is really volatile politically. It's been, it's been a Conservative seat, a Liberal Democrat seat, now a Labour seat. So it's not like one of those, it's always been like this area. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I agree with the point about the development corporation. It makes a lot of sense to have the development corporation. If you're saying, let's make the councils, whatever they're going to look like, let's make the councils based around natural travel to work areas, it makes sense then, if you're going to have a development corporation, to sit that on top of those travel to work areas. And I've always said, that Cambridge and South Cambs on their own don't work as a development corporation. It's not big enough. It just isn't. And there is inevitably going to be some partisanship. I feel it in a number of areas. And the way things stand now, Fenland moving into Peterborough would probably make Peterborough a majority Conservative authority. That's a reality, and so you can see Peterborough reacting to that, and the current leadership in Peterborough reacting to that. But I also think that you could argue Fenland could be split in two as well, by the way, because there's a natural draw towards Ely and Cambridge from places like Chatteris in particular. But there is there's a reality within all of this that in terms of serving the electorate, which is in whatever way we do, if you are elected, and the decisions that are made have to be based around what is best for the electorate of Cambridgeshire. And I go back to the waste thing. This idea that you have one authority collecting waste and another authority disposing of it, it makes absolutely no sense to anybody. And it's those things, when you look at it, when you look at social care and actually the implications for social care, and the fact that planning applications for care homes, which are absolutely fundamental to the future of social care and what happens, are made at district level. And yet social care as an entity is dealt with at county level. And all those things, they don't make sense. It makes more sense for it to be unitarised.
Yeah,
and that's the basis on which councillors should start, and then start looking at what are the natural travel to work areas that we base our boundaries around. And if they do that, there is some compromise needed, but for me, it's doable.
Yeah, I agree. I think if the development corporation boundaries was done around travel to work areas, including some of the market towns and like other parts of the county as discussed, I think it makes sense to say, well, unitary could follow the boundaries of this development corporation activity, right? I think the issue is some people are saying like, well, Cambridge city itself and just the surrounding villages could be the corporation in itself, and enough growth can be done within that Cambridge city, north of Cambridge and surrounding area, to be able to be its own unitary. And that's where I kind of disagree, because I also don't think it's like necessarily possible to build so much under such a short period of time with all the issues there.
If you think about some of the things that are going on in other councils, Hertfordshire is an example, although it's not just Hertfordshire, but their plans for a rapid transit system as an example, that they've been working on for some years. That is a cross Hertfordshire thing, and it's done because they've got the Hertfordshire. In my view, one of the reasons it happens is they've got the Hertfordshire Growth Board, which operates sort of pan Hertfordshire, and it's a really good body. And actually, those sorts of things are needed in Cambridgeshire. These little rapid transit systems and effectively guided bus plus is the way I'd put it. Where they're using their own dedicated routes, but without all that concrete and everything else that was the disaster in terms of delivering the guided bus. And all those things happen and are made easier if you've got bigger authorities. And for me personally, if I was given a choice of what I would prefer a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough unitary. I really would. I just don't think it's going to happen. I suspect it's going to be split in two, and I can absolutely see the noise that Peterborough would make, given that a few years ago Peterborough got unitary status because they said they were they were always left out and ignored in decisions as related to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I don't necessarily buy that that's true, but that issue is going to be revisited, and I can see it winning.
Can I just something, because we're talking about the size of things and so on. One of the things I've already seen people saying is that they'll be too big, or that one of the things that you'll lose, because you've got the economic thing, but you won't have the focus on local area or on smaller areas. So to give an example, the district council has spent a lot of time and capital, both actual capital and political capital, on improving St Neots. It's also I'm just using that as an example. Would you still have that level of focus? Are you going to get the same level of focus on a market town? Because like for Huntingdonshire, St Neots is the biggest settlement.
So that's the big question, isn't it? Because devolution is about bringing back, power to local areas, and we're doing that, at the level above us. But one of my issues with the county council is it's just so big. It's so big you can never get your arms around it. And I feel like a really small player at county council in a way that I don't in Huntingdonshire. And so actually for me, the level of local democracy which works best is my district council. Yeah. And I like the idea of district councils feeding into a combined authority. I think that's the right level. Big mega authorities not so much. But maybe district councils feeding into a combined authority is not very much different than a two-tier system. I don't know, but I do like the local. It's how we retain that local kind of influence and interest and expertise.
There's two things within that. If you look at those councils that have moved to unitaries, most of them have maintained some sort of area status. So, you know, as an example, if Fenland moved into Peterborough, yes, you move the planning department into Peterborough and stuff like that, but the council itself would remain and maintain an area sort of system with some focus on you know, on maintaining a number of staff that are dedicated to the area, and on top of that you have area committees, which is where your voice goes in, so there are ways of making that work, and there's also a case to be said that if you're going to do this, let's look at the powers that in particular town councils have, and is there an argument for giving them a little bit more responsibility?
Never.
Well, I think
that's the worst level of local democracy for me. That's where most of the bad behaviour comes from, because it comes down to the quality of the civil servants at that level. There are some exceptional clerks, yeah, and I'd say, you know, I was at Little Paxton last night. That's an exceptional clerk, and St Neots Town Council is an exceptional clerk. There's also lots of really poor clerks, yeah, and lots of old boy club sort of mentality and bad decision making, and so we'd have to reinforce that level to make it work, because at the moment I think it's the one that is the most vulnerable.
Town councils tend to have better clerks than parish councils, I have to say, for good reason, because they can pay more. But I would also say that the new clerk at Huntingdon looks really, really good. It's a locum clerk at Huntingdon at the moment. We're so just because there is no vacancy, that we have a locum for you know. Actually, I mean, I think So, yeah, okay.
So yes, if you can get those next gen clerks in, because the trouble is people get into being clerks and they stay there for too long and they just don't move on, which sounds a bit discriminatory. But you know, I'm sure there's some exceptional older clerks as well. But my experience, like some of these people are stuck in the past, and it's really quite difficult. I mean, it was a big problem for me at St Neots Town Council.
But maybe this is the opportunity, Stephen, to do that and to start to change the nature of those clerks, and also with town councils. You know, one of the things is some of these, and I speak locally as an example. Some of these councils that you know, they're very, very low. You know, the amount of staff they have is so low that the town councils themselves aren't facilitated to do anything, and that is not a good thing as well. And I feel that's true of Whittlesey, where a more professional sort of setup would help. It's not that's not a comment on the clerk that Whittlesey has, by the way, at the moment. She's really good. It's just that I feel that the town council could do more, and you know, having a better professional organisation would do it. And I do feel that the town council is capable of taking on more responsibility, and I see that elsewhere as well, by the way.
So I think I agree. I think the issue at the moment, or one of the things I have concerns about, is the general power of competence, where town councils can do anything except take out a mortgage that a natural person can do.
I beg to differ. They can take out mortgages.
Take out big loans.
Effectively, what they do is it's public works loan board.
Yeah.
But your town council.
Yeah, but
I know this because Whittlesey Town Council, one of its better decisions, a really good decision actually, bought Peel House a few years ago through a loan. Which is
and Huntingdon has got a multi-million-pound public works board loan for the crematorium and depot. So yeah, but
which is not such a good decision.
I'm glad you know what it's called, because I got it wrong.
Yeah, no, part of the UK Debt Management Office. Woo! But I think actually it would be there's a need there's. I wonder if, I mean, and realistically, that's not, you know, I think it's going to be very difficult to unpick that, because lots of councils have done new and interesting and innovative things. Town councils and parish councils, I mean. But it feels that there's been as like, oh, is this a district council thing or a town council thing? For instance, the one of the ones that drives me up the wall is bus stops,
Yep.
where you've got town and parish councils can put in their own bus stops, and that has just led to unnecessary complication. And I think that there might be some things. This is something you've mentioned, Martin, and something I forget who it was in the last show said that you could have a system where town and the default, if you like, is that towns and parishes don't do a huge amount, but that they can pull services down and take the money that comes with it as they feel able. So if you're a relatively large, well-staffed council like Huntingdon, actually you might say, actually, you know what, we think we can do more of the parks around here. We can do more of the maintenance. We can do the roads. If you're a parish council, which is this might not be around here, but which is one small village, and then a huge amount of geographical area with lots of roads in it, you might say, actually that's never going to work for us.
But it's also true that some of this stuff, like the bus stops and all that, there is a sense that realignment and local government reorganization will provide an opportunity to consolidate that stuff. And I agree with the thing about green spaces and stuff. I think to a certain extent, you could say the same about potholes, that you have a strategic authority contract, but the local management of that contract happens at a more local level. And I know that sort of happens now.
That's the idea. It doesn't really work out very often. But
but I think that it's that sort of thing that we need to sort of think about, because having the eyes on the ground. And I'll give you a great example of that. In Finland, town councils don't look after cemeteries. It's looked after by Finland. And I remember a few years ago going to visit our cemetery for whatever reason, and just looking around, and they'd done some maintenance on the cemetery where they basically they propped up a load of headstones and stuff like that, and they'd basically used wooden sticks to prop them up and stuff like this, and it looked awful. It really, and there was no sensitivity to the fact that these are people's relatives and things like that in the way it had been done. And so I asked one of the officers, a really good officer from Finland who's no longer there but is now a chief executive elsewhere, to walk around, and I walked around with him, and he said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." And I don't think that would have happened if the town council had been managing the cemetery. And I'm sure there's examples of that elsewhere as well.
Because in Huntingdon Town Council look after the cemeteries, I think, to a remarkable standard. And we do. People have commented to me, that they've how much they appreciate that the cemeteries are maintained so well when they're visiting their loved ones. But of course, there's issues from time to time, but people really do appreciate the sort of love and the care that goes in. And I suppose it's that difficult one, just the patchwork.
Yeah, but and that's some of that consolidation. I think makes a lot of sense. It's an opportunity to do that. And that for me is a good reason for delaying elections as well, by the way, because you can focus on dealing with those and delivering those things over the next year while you pull together this new authority, rather than worrying about everything else. But there you go. What do I know?
Yeah, I mean the one of the things I think might be good as well is less councillors. And hopefully that means that you would get better councillors.
Yeah, I think I agree. What government need to start doing now is, as we move on to these strategic authorities, they need to be pushing businesses to encourage their councillors to get to businesses and get businesses to understand what fantastic professional development being a councillor can be. When you think about what you learn about managing and taking an oversight and a critical friend oversight, as an example of major budgets, as an example, or strategic decisions around how social care is organised and that sort of stuff, it's fantastic development, and they need to be pushing. Some of their up and coming talent to stand for election, because you drive up the standard of councillors, and businesses would benefit from it as well. And so government need to start doing that and saying to business, if you want great councils, start encouraging your councils to stand, your talent to stand. Because at the moment, the opposite happens. They see that somebody's going to be away 4 or 5 days a month doing meetings or doing whatever. And as a result of that, they think, oh, that's a bad thing for us. But actually, nurturing good people is something that good businesses should be doing. And so, part of this whole thing and this whole move should be a drive to do that.
I mean, one thing I'll say is when I was Mayor of Huntingdon, my work were incredibly supportive, and were very flexible, which I'm very grateful for. And my boss in particular, my direct boss, earned a lot of loyalty from me because of that. And if you want to keep people so they stay for a long time, it's a good way of doing it.
It was part of the reason I left the civil service. The civil service did give me some time to be a councillor, to be fair, and they were pretty good with it. But when I was elected to the second tier and eventually got elected onto county council, which I think was 2005, I made a decision to go and work part-time, because of that, because I don't want to do a councillor's job and do it, for want of a better phrase, half-assed. And so I've decided to move part-time. I even found it very, very difficult to manage it, with part-time work as well.
It's almost impossible. Yeah.
So from that perspective, there's a thing about making sure that if we reduce the number of councillors we have a drive to get businesses to encourage talent to stand. But at the same time, we make sure we reward councillors better so that they can afford to be more professional.
Yeah, I think so as well, because I think it's good to encourage, different organizations and businesses, as well as I would say, especially some of the bigger, charities and organizations where the jobs are a bit more stable and you could actually have a counselor job and maybe have more flexibility in your hours to support that. But at the same time, I think one of my concerns is if you keep the same county boundaries and you have the same number, let's say, of counselors, we're yet to see this, but with more responsibility, I think some of the people who are now really struggling with the workload as it is alongside their work will consider again if they want to restand. If they will have even more. Stephen here can speak about his experience. But for example, for me, I already get quite a lot of casework, which I try, every weekend I try to catch up with the email backlog. If you add, housing casework and everything else on top of that, you can see how the time spent on counselor duties will increase if you want to do the job properly. And therefore, if the allowance doesn't, it will discourage some people.
If you think about the charity and the charitable sector is a great example. Can you imagine how beneficial it would be, as an example, to have somebody who's employed by let's say Crisis as a start, or Shelter, as a councillor, and the benefit? And I'm sure Shelter have got some people that are elected as councillors that are employees as well. But if you could make that more universal, the impact you might be able to have on delivering homeless strategies could be significant. If you get really good people doing that.
As soon as you get in that position, you start getting knocked out by conflicts of interest as well. If you're working for somebody and you're in that, so that's happening at the moment. Is where the best people with the best expertise are not allowed to speak in their areas of expertise because their employers are in that sector, which can be really quite difficult sometimes. So that's another challenge as well, isn't it?
But if you look at how Parliament works, Parliament does not stop somebody with an outside interest from talking. What Parliament does is make you declare it, and I'll give you a great example that Andrew Lansley, who's obviously a Lord, but he asked a question last week in the House of Lords about some clarification around the government's plans on housing, and the first thing he did was stand up and say, "I draw your attention to my role as chair of the Cambridge Development Forum." And that's the way it should be done. You shouldn't stop people with expertise having a voice. What you need to do is make sure that that's explicit. And as long as you're explicit and people understand it, it allows the scrutiny that you need to make sure that somebody's not saying things for the wrong reasons. Because, and actually, those people will be saying things, a lot of them, not all of them, will be saying things for the wrong reasons if they're going to do that under the radar anyway. So, you know, what you say in a council meeting really isn't the business. No. It's all the stuff that goes on. And I will say this about when people obsess with councillors' attendance at meetings. Yes, councillors should attend meetings where they can and everything else, and they should be able to attend quite a few. But actually, that's not the important job of a councillor. The important job of a councillor is the stuff you do between meetings. And that's more important, and the influence you have there. And if you're declaring things and using your expertise, those overt declarations are the thing that will hold you to account.
Yeah, I think the difference as well is a kind of the financial interest, because, for instance, when I did some motions at the county council on migration, obviously I work in the third sector on migration, I declared the interest. I said, like, you know, it's on my register of interest. I work for this organization. I say at the beginning of debate, yes, I, you know, worked on those campaigns and related issues in my non-council work, but I don't get, you know, compensated. I don't get, like, you know, more money because I pass a motion at council on the campaign I'm working on. It's, you know, it's something that I'm passionate about, and that shows because I work outside the council on that thing. So I think as long as you declare it and you're not like coerced into like doing stuff for council, like through your role, like, you know, it's not a problem to, you know, to speak about your expertise. And actually, like, I feel, you know, in my case, because I work on migration policy issues outside, it does benefit the debate, because other colleagues might not have that experience and might actually, you know, benefit from that knowledge in the same way I will benefit from someone who works in planning, for example, and I don't when, you know, I listen to those debates.
I mean, you know that I work in planning, and one of the things I don't do is projects in Finland, and the reason for that is that, you know, I can see, well, there's all sorts of reasons for it, but, you know, I've got connections probably better within Finland than anywhere else. I live in Finland, and there's all sorts of arguments around that. I've stood for council recently in Finland, but there's a reality, which is that, you know, the knowledge I have of planning and how planning works, and the fact that I see planning committees and how planning committees operate pretty much across, you know, the east of England and the East Midlands, you know, the expertise I bring with that, you know, would be beneficial to Finland if I was elected. But all that would happen is I'd be shut out of the decisions and the way that influence. The reality is, you know, aside from that, you know, when I stood for election and didn't win, one of the next things I did was sit down with Chris Bowden and talk through a few things with him. And to credit Chris, he did sit and listen, as did Dee Laws, who's the cabinet member. But you know, that it's absolutely right. And you know that. Can I just say that brings us on to the issue of standards, which
yeah, that's
I'm quite keen to talk about, because I think it's really important and it does need some discussion.
Go for it.
Yeah, which is the fact that part of the announcement, or a separate announcement, is the government talking about bringing back a national standards organisation, and there's part of me welcomes it, and part of me is really, really concerned that we're heading back to, you know, what we had pre-2010, which actually was a bureaucratic mess. So,
I mean, I'm hoping that this is all stuff that they're working on. There's stuff in the white paper about standards. I mean, they are talking about. Actually, I'm going to bring up the relevant bit. They are talking about different things that I think are things that we've mentioned on the show before would be good. I suppose, as ever, it's the exactly how is it going to work can actually make quite a big difference. So it's a mandatory code of conduct, requirement for all principal authorities to convene standard committees, national body for the most serious cases, as was the case under the former system, with the Standards Board for England, subject to discussions with the sector, powers to suspend, disqualification if subject to suspension more than once, interim suspension while under investigation, publish all code breach investigation outcomes. I mean, yeah.
My problem is the Standards Board for England was over the top in what it did and where it did, and when it said it only took on the most important issues, it's not the case, and it actually became a political tool. The fact that you were referred to the Standards Board for England became a media issue, irrespective of whether you were found guilty or not, and it was never a media issue when you were found innocent, by the way, and cleared by them. But also it took up resource that in reality is resource that should be passed down to local councils. So it's not to say I disagree with what they're doing. I just hope that what they're not doing is creating another an absolute replacement for what was there before. And I do agree that in certain circumstances councillors should be disqualified while hearings are heard. Just as an example, and this is actually slightly different, but we've had councillors in or ex-councillors in Cambridgeshire convicted of rape, and horrific actually, and there's a reality there that if you've got a councillor that has responsibility for social care and has responsibility for other things, you would sit there and think, well, while he's under investigation for rape and been charged for rape, he shouldn't be carrying out his duties as a councillor. And something that says and puts that into context, I think would be good. How you deal with councillors that refuse to take training or refuse to apologise for the stuff they've done, is another example. And yes, on the very worst offences, somebody that can say, look, this isn't good enough, you shouldn't be a councillor anymore, I think is right. But how you get that without making it a monstrosity is another matter.
I mean, that is really difficult, and particularly, and there it comes down to a lot to sort of political culture, and this is one of the problems you see in the States now, where people are using mechanisms that are meant for meant for being used in one way, but they have the power there, and they end up being used for completely different things. I'm thinking of presidential pardons and stuff that Joe Biden's done recently, but there's other ones like that. I mean, this is the line. What was it? Borges talking about the South American constitutions. They were written for angels, not humans. So that is a really difficult thing to do. That if you've got a power there that you need to be able to use decisively but sparingly, that's really difficult to write how to do that, and it comes down to political culture.
But yeah, no, I agree, and that point about it being written for angels rather than humans, I think is absolutely right. But it's also, there are real practicalities in that. We've had, as an example, at Cambridgeshire, a councillor, two councillors, I think, but at least one, who has been found wanting by the Standards Board recently. And I've sort of got I know Alex was involved in this, so I've got to be careful. But the reality is, the outcome of that was he was asked to apologise and hasn't done so, is what I understand. And there's a reality of that, which is that the apology is part of something about self-improvement and about accepting that you've done wrong. And the lack of an apology just says, well, it's going to happen again. The other thing that Angela Rayner has said, and this is really important, is they're going to provide clarity around use of social media within this. And I think, I think it's important. And the reason it's important is that certainly within Finland, there's this culture that if you say it on social media, then you can make the case that you're not acting in your capacity as a councillor. When you are talking political issues, you're talking about council issues, and you're talking to councillors or others, and it's quite clear that you are. As an elected councillor, anything you say that is political is you acting in your capacity as a councillor, as far as I'm concerned. And that clarity, I think, is really, really important, because it's being used as an opportunity to allow councillors to ignore the wrongdoings.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Livingston exception, isn't it? I wasn't acting as a in my official capacity. Yeah,
I remember that one, and he was at an official event at the point at which he did it, and I'm not going to talk about what he did because it was disgusting.
Yeah. And that's the problem. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to dash pretty quickly because I am going to get a Tiger on demand to go and play Warhammer. But one of the things I'm not clear about is if we have a combined authority with 2 unitaries under it, what's the point? It's like the I mean, I'm just thinking some of it is the practical stuff. Like, do you then have a board with 3 people on it?
No, well, they've said that I think it'll change, and this board structures change, don't they? And I think that's important too. And it is important, but it's something that needs to be worked out. If we split to 2 unitaries, do we have 2 mayors? As an example.
Well, our unitary is too small, isn't it? I think unitaries with unitaries going into an elected mayor for regions is a good idea. It's just that our region is, because of another bumble devolution attempt, is much too small. It's only a
Sorry, excuse me. I'm going to have to go.
Well, it's Cambridgeshire is about 900,000 if you include Peterborough, and so if you take a natural split for that, you're talking about 2 lots of 450,000, which is smaller than Angela Rayner is saying she'll allow.
But that's the minimum size they've said. Have they mentioned the maximum size? Because
no,
or is that the target size? Because
it's
a lot bigger.
It's a minimum size, but if you think about the West Midlands as an example, as a combined authority, it's much bigger than that. It's huge. But that's got a different structure, and I suspect they'll put structures underneath. But you won't have the county council as an example. So that will go if you've got a unitary. So you won't have counties and districts. You won't have the GCP, which sitting as an anomaly. So it will simplify things.
Yeah. I think regional mayors will be better than the Cambridgeshire mayor because it's just too small. There's the political gradients are too high. There's no kind of consensus, isn't there? And there's been lots of that's been a cause of lots of the disquiet and the trouble we've had across the first 2 terms as well. So having a bigger area might even some of that out, I think. And that was the original conception, wasn't it? It was going to include parts of Norfolk and parts of Suffolk as well. And the original agreement was signed with that on it, and then Norfolk and Suffolk backed out, which left us with this kind of stunted.
Well, that was the local enterprise partnership, and absolutely, and the LEP was the LEP was used as a I'm trying to find the right way of saying this. It was used as a political tool, is what I would say. Some things were going on in the LEP that weren't great, but actually they were. I'm trying to find the right way of saying this. Totally my perspective, but I was quite active with the LEP. The issues were one of the things that Eric Pickles put the LEPs in place for. And one of the things he said was he didn't want LEPs to become managed and bureaucratic like a combined authority. And that led to some decision making that wasn't great. But the issue was more the accountability for that decision making. And what happened was, as soon as that was pushed, and that's the reason that the Cambridgeshire LEP basically got disbanded, apart from the fact that it disagreed with the mayor quite a bit at that time. And and Cambridgeshire was used as an example of, this shouldn't be happening. We should be, we should have a proper audit trails. We should be doing this, should be doing it, which is exactly what Eric Pickles said he didn't want. And then what happened is every single LEP in the country had to change and become more bureaucratic as a result of it. But that's it's the sort of things we need to watch though, and make sure we do is make sure the standards that we use in terms of accountability and in terms of making sure that our decisions and the recommendations that go behind those decisions and the work of officers are accountable.
I agree.
Maybe we have clarity.
So
Maybe
you
we'll
up,
talk about it in the new year about the boundaries.
so are you up for being a unitary councillor, Alex? You are, because it's part of your life, isn't it? I feel like I've done it to a certain extent by being a double hatter, yeah, and for a short time a triple hatter as well. And I think like I've dealt with all the problems,
Me too.
and it's hard work, man.
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, I think after like so many decades, when I go door knocking and most of the people are still the council, there's no differentiation
Yeah.
between different councils. I think we got it wrong. And I think it's time to like at least try to get it a bit better. Like if, it didn't work for, people to understand the differences between like town, district, and council. Obviously, there's a failure of communicating in general, but also is the fact that in so many areas it just doesn't make sense. Like like on waste and like so many other areas.
Yeah, the point for me is there are no perfect answers. There are just answers that are far less perfect than others, and what we've got now is something that's far less perfect than it could be. That's a reality, and we've got to go ahead for something that's better, accept that it isn't going to be perfect, but accept that it is going to be an improvement on where we are now. And one of the other things they've talked about is giving strategic planning powers to combined authority mayors, and that's where it will potentially make a difference, because the planning system as we have it now that doesn't allow for proper sort of sub-regional strategic thinking. There's some of that, but not enough of it. That sort of stuff becomes really important, because that's how you plan transport investment, as an example.
So Stephen, you're not looking forward then, he said.
It's the whole thing of I've enjoyed the last 8 years, but now I've changed employers and I'm in a full-time job, which I'm really enjoying, and I want to think about that all the time. Coming home in the evening and having, like this week, I've been out every single night, with council stuff, and it's just not sustainable for full-time professionals. And as much as I'd like to imagine myself as a unitary councillor, it'd have to be able to compensate me for giving up my job, because it's not just a charitable thing. I've got a mortgage to pay and a family to keep. I can't afford to cut my salary anymore to be a councillor, and that's part of the problem. And eventually, I guess people like me will drift away from it if we don't get unelected first.
That's exactly where I was, though, Stephen. I was pretty much a full-time councillor when I was I was doing a few bits on the side, sort of NED stuff and non-exec stuff and things, but and I was doing stuff with the LGA, but I was pretty much a full-time councillor. And part of the not the reason I stood down basically because of the move towards committee systems, which I thought would be wrong, and I argue I was proved right. But when I moved away from being leader, it quite clearly became clear to me, I had to find another job then, and it became clear to me that being a councillor and having a job just weren't compatible, and so that's why I walked away a year later. I just wasn't doing my job as a councillor properly, and I just said no, not doing it.
So I'm not sure that I'd be up for. I mean, I'd like the idea, and maybe it's something I can step away from. I've only got probably 7 or 8 more years working life left in me, and come back to it at a later stage. But then we get to the problem of having elderly councillors who are just pensioners who can afford to do it again.
There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with having elderly councillors, because there's a point about, and I feel this about politics at a national level, that wisdom is being shut out of politics in effect. It's just about getting the balance right. And there are far too many older councillors now, some of whom are well past their best.
Yeah, I mean, it's the question about like the average age as well, because I think you need people representing all the different age groups in local government. It's about the average, and the average actually increasing. And actually you can see this with the cost of living and more people being less likely to afford stuff. Like over the last years, actually it's been increasing a little bit, which makes sense, because if you're someone, in your 20s and planning like a councillor allowance alongside a job that's paid below average wage or average wage, it's very difficult to make sense financially.
So let's go back to something we've talked about before that links into this. So if you're changing the status of councils, if you're making them councillors and the role of councillors, but broadly more strategic, should you go back to what it was like pre-2010 and allow councillors to join pension schemes? local authority pension scheme?
I think it's not something that most councillors worry about, because they're either too elderly or too young to think about pensions. But for me now, at the tail end of my working life, my pension is the most important thing, isn't it? Because I want to retire at some stage. I check it out every single day, and that's part of the problem, is that you can get a council allowance, but I pay massive tax and all of that, and none of it can go into my pension. And so actually, when I'm looking at, can I afford to live without a council allowance? Actually, I'm more interested in channeling money into my pension and not paying 45% tax on it sometimes, and that's also an issue, which is a nice problem to have. I get you, but
I got grief from certain individuals because I chose, while I was a councillor and all the time I was a councillor, to join the pension scheme. And one individual in particular, who was somebody I didn't get on with anyway, who was a Conservative, by the way, gave me all sorts of grief about it, gave me a hard time a number of times about the fact that I was a member of the pension scheme and blah, blah, blah. And a year after he had stood down as a councillor, he said to me the biggest mistake he made as a councillor was not joining the pension schemes.
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
you say you're close to retirement. I'm closer than you are, and quite a bit closer, I think. And there's a reality for me that I sit and look at it and think, actually, all that time when I was pretty much working full time as a councillor and sacrificing income to do it, and that's important. The one benefit I had was I was subscribing to a pension scheme, and a good pension scheme.
I would be more likely to continue being a councillor if I could put that income into pension. Because at the moment, whatever you get from allowances goes in tax anyway. You don't really see almost. You see almost.
It depends. It depends if you're on 20% or not. If you're on 40%.
But I get that. I get that as well. But that's like if you want to attract people of a certain age, with more experience as well, and in their working life still, then you have to consider these things, because there are consequences at work as well. I just got made redundant. Was that because I spent most of the last 6 years not focusing as much as I could have done? If you want to be career minded, I don't think you can be a councillor and be seeking promotion as well. And so that there's cost to me as well. And at some stage, I don't want to work till I'm 90 and I want to retire, and so I've got to make the most of my income.
You put career on hold as a councillor. That was my experience as well.
I definitely did. Yeah,
absolutely. And all those things need to be borne in mind. And I think this idea of encouraging young, enthusiastic, up and coming people within businesses to stand, even if it's for 1 or 2 terms, the value you get out of those people would be great, and you would also enable a bit of churn as well. And I think that's important as well with councils. So many councils where you've got so many people that have been there for years and years and years, and actually don't contribute a lot as well.
No. But I mean, we should finish here. But I was looking at a video of the previous county council, in Old Shire Hall, and I didn't recognise most of the people as well. Which is, I guess, that's partly because of the political upheaval that happened when we were elected as well. But the other thing is that people, good people, will step away because they can't do it forever. And it will have been 8 years of my life to it. And can I afford to do that again? I don't necessarily have the enthusiasm for it that I used to. I'm kind of tarnished by it. It's beating me up quite a lot. General election didn't help, which Martin warned me about. But yeah, we've got to get rid of some of the old wood. But exactly. We've got to get rid of some of the old wood, but we've also got to make sure that it's a sustainable thing and we keep some expertise on board as well. Because for lots of it probably takes you 8 years to learn how to be a good counsellor, and then some of us are too tired that we want to be able to do it again. Which I'm not saying I'm going to, but it's a consideration still.
Yeah, I think it's a consideration for everyone, because I think back to the careers point as well, I think it also does influence the choice of roles as well. Because, for example, like 1 year in, I was like, I can't do this job anymore. So I became self-employed. I started my own organization. But now I realized, I can't do a full-time job in the organization that I co-founded. So now what I'm doing is a mix of kind of self-employment, policy advice roles. So then you kind of get more political jobs to fit with your county council, which then it means you have lots of people, the kind of complaints say, oh, they all work for Labour MPs. Well, because it's easier to actually fit it around the council duties, or oh, they all work for Conservative MPs, for some Conservative councillors. Yeah. It's just often more flexible, and obviously you don't have the problem of the employer disagreeing with your,
political. this is quite interesting because part of the conversations I have with my clients in the world I work is about how power works within local authorities, and this notion that, you know, you've got a leader there or you've got a committee chairman and that's where the power rests. In some councils it does, but in a lot of councils that's often not the case. And you know what you need to do is sort of look at councillors and understand them and try and understand where the power really rests. And it's you pick out a lot of the time those councillors that work for members of parliament as an example, and there are loads of them, loads and loads of them, and often there's a lot of power revolving around those people. They're never going to be a leader because they would have to sacrifice that, you know, what they're doing with the MP and everything else, but they wield huge amounts of influence. And you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing if they're, you know, if they're good councillors as well, but it does change the dynamics a little bit. And we do need more working people as councillors.
Yeah. Talking of which, it's nearly 9 o'clock, and if I keep going, I might not be a working person for much longer, so we should probably end there. I'm looking forward to Christmas, everyone. Didn't talk about much about it, did we? But
yeah, are we having our Christmas party somewhere between Christmas and New Year?
I'm not working, so it'll be a good chance to make up for some drinks. Actually, I could do with some alcohol-fueled Christmas celebration. So we'll decide offline. Maybe we should invite everybody else with us as well and have in the pub. We'll publish where we're going, and then we might even get murdered, but who knows? All right, on that, I need to go to work. So lovely talking, everybody. Have a happy Christmas.
And you. Cheers.
Bye.
See you in the new year. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.